Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Chris Burton, Baptist chaplain on the globe once again, hoping all is well with you and yours. I'm here speaking with Shereetha Jackson, Chief Operating Officer of Church of the Common Ground. Shereetha, how are you doing today?
Am fantastic. I'm here with you first and foremost, so that's always a bonus, good vibes. But all in all, I'm doing wonderful and I'm excited to be here today with you.
Well, I'm excited for you to be here as well and grateful to spend some time with you and just talking about the great work that you're doing for sure. You know what I mean? So first, talk to us a bit about your journey. Like, what led you to this role at Church of the Common Ground?
Wow. So, I mean, we only have a short amount of time, so I'll make it short and sweet. But first, let me give you a little bit of background. The Church of the Common Ground, it's a church without walls. Okay. So, we don't have a building. We are outside. We are serving folks who are experiencing homelessness here in the city of Atlanta. And so often for those who have opportunity to come and be with us, you'll hear me say over and over again, this is the church.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, in a roundabout way, how I connected with this ministry, this spiritual community, I received an invitation from the vicar, who is now a dear friend. And I will be honest, I told her no. So I said, no, thank you. And it wasn't because this ministry wasn't necessarily a priority, but I was very clear about understanding the importance of what I could give my spoons to. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the spoon theory.
You're
Uh,
speaking my language.
okay. And understanding that as a cancer survivor, I had to be clear of what's important, of what I can give my spoons to, but also recognizing that am I capable of providing the spoons that this community needs and deserves? So when I received that initial invitation, I said no. She reached out a few months later to invite me to reconsider being part of the ministry. And I said no again. The third time is the charm. And I really went into a period of discernment because serving folks who are impacted by homelessness is a great honor. And
Hmm.
I don't say that lightly. Serving people in creating a space of dignity, right?
Hmm.
And listening to stories and helping shape through agency and just being in that space. Finally, spoiler alert, yes, I said yes, but it took me a minute to get there. So I don't make decisions lightly. So even in showing up here today with you, you only had to ask once.
That's
So
real. That's real. I feel blessed by that. Absolute, absolute. So like what was it in your like own journey? Like when you think about your understandings of community, faith, social change, that made you say, you know what? I can see how this mission of Church of the Common Ground makes sense for me.
Honestly, in taking that period of discernment, which I was fortunate to do, I started at Common Ground in the height of the pandemic, okay, in
My goodness.
2020. So, what ministry looks like today for Common Ground is 80 from
Yeah.
when I came in. So, one, I had to take into consideration what that meant to move into that space during such a time of uncertainty, questioning my own capabilities of being able to have some sort of impact. But when I sit back and think about how I connected to it in true fashion, a few short years before, I had lost my home to a house fire
Oh,
and I
goodness.
was
Yeah.
actually homeless myself. And so I
Right.
had true deep empathy for what it meant to go through an experience of displacement. And so
Hmm.
that is my true tie with being within this community, within this ministry. I don't understand everything. Everyone's experience, everyone's journey is different, but I can meet them in that moment of true understanding of what it means to be displaced
Right.
and not knowing what your next move, perhaps for some your next meal, what that
Right.
looks like.
When you talk about it as, you opened up by saying this is a church without walls. I can imagine there are very traditional people whose minds are just blown. They can't imagine a church without walls. But talk about how, that sort of radical hospitality that you all employ. How is that creating a welcoming space that may challenge a bit of the traditional notions that we have around church service or even charity?
Absolutely. So when we talk about radical hospitality, it is just that. When someone, you introduce me as the chief operating officer of Church of the Common Ground, but I will typically introduce myself as a street barista. Okay. I serve
Oh,
coffee. Yeah, that's it. That is if there's a job title, I will tell
yeah,
you, I'm a street barista. I go out, I serve coffee, and I do so in a way that promotes agency.
yeah.
Never just say, here's a pre-made cup. It's always an ask. How would you like your coffee? Would you like cream? Would you like sugar? Do you want it? It's called a cowboy style. Do you want it black? Right?
That's it.
I tried to get creative during COVID and came up with our version of a mocha, which is the holy roller. Okay. And
Okay.
we put hot chocolate in it and
Mm.
we roll with whatever creamer we have. So sometimes we have flavored creamer. I think the wildest might have been Snickers. We had a Snickers
Wow.
flavor.
Yes, that's
It
different.
was, yeah, it's very sweet. But with that in mind, when we're talking about radical hospitality and also looking at it through the lens of, well, this is a non-traditional church, right? A non-traditional spiritual community. There's a saying that we have, and it's this: we go rain, shine, sleet, or snow. We just don't do hurricanes or tornadoes. Okay. Now,
Safe.
we're a church without walls, so there are many days that we're getting hit with rain. It's cold today. It's very cold here in Atlanta.
Right.
This can be challenging for someone who's accustomed to being within a building. But
Yes.
if you can take that framework, if you can expand it a little bit, think outside the box, think
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
outside the walls, then you
Right.
start to see what community can be. I
Yeah.
think the most, I won't say challenging, but the a significant aspect of my position that has caused me to expand is that on Tuesdays we have a weekly foot clinic. I'm washing feet. Mm-hmm.
Just
I
like
wash.
Jesus.
Yes, I'm washing feet on Tuesdays. We have a foot clinic. Yeah, and everything that we do, we have to bring the materials. So we're talking, minimum 36 gallons of hot water so we can make sure we have clean water to not just for, our parishioners, but to make sure we're having where we can sanitize things and so on and so forth.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So,
yeah.
people who are experiencing homelessness can walk minimum of 10 miles a day just to get the resources that they need. So
Goodness.
I want you to think about that for a moment on a good day. Because I just talked about we've had rain here, okay, and
Yeah.
it's cold.
Right.
So on a good day where the sun is shining, your what minimal belongings you do have, everything's dry. You're still having to go from point A to B to C to D, right? And just to get the resources that you need.
Right.
And
Right.
there's an assumption that you have a good pair of shoes and that you have clean socks.
Socks is really a key aspect of that. People don't
Yeah.
understand how important clean socks are for
Yeah.
real.
So this side of ministry, this side of my job, and I'm reluctant to call it a job
Yeah.
because it is something that I do feel called to. But washing feet, if anyone ever, someone catches this podcast, I want you to remember wherever you are, especially if it's a Tuesday, that Tuesdays are Toes Day at Common Ground.
Toes.
We're taking care of feet on Tuesdays. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
every Tuesday, I'm again, Chris, I'm not gonna sit here and act like, oh yes, I am washing feet. I'm saying no. This is where that period of discernment came in, and understanding that there are needs that will stretch you. And
Yes.
this aspect of radical hospitality
Yes.
and being outside in various forms of weather and different conditions, it's a labor of love.
No question about it. No question about it. I'm hearing you say this, and all I can think about is that you are standing at the intersection of occupation and vocation, which is rarefied air for a lot of people. People may have a calling on their life, but they're like, I gotta pay the bills, or they may be like, this is like my job. I love this, but they're
Mhm.
ignoring the call. but you've been blessed to be at that crossroad right there where the calling is lining up with your line of work. So that's a blessing for real.
And again, I'm a human, and I think that's why I opened the conversation
Yeah.
in naming that I said no. Okay.
Right.
I said no.
Right.
And I had to be asked again. And I'm fortunate enough that my dear friend and colleague saw enough. Like
Yeah.
they listened, okay? They had an ear and they understood the mission and the calling, and they
Yeah.
were willing to ask again. And they're an individual that's not used to being told no.
Right. Hear that. Hear that.
So with that, I had to take a time to discern. Radical hospitality is just that there are days that I am, as I shared, I'm a cancer survivor living with that form of chronic pain, chronic illness. It takes a toll on my body.
Of course.
In that you have to find a balance. So
Yeah.
sometimes radical hospitality looks like turning that energy towards yourself
No
so that
question.
you can be the vessel. So
Yeah.
having that care for yourself.
No doubt about it. And there's a way that we honor the assignment by being kind to ourselves that I think a lot of folks wrestle with or aren't, doing their best work at. They beat themselves up. They're, exhausting themselves in every corner. They don't value rest. They don't value nutrition. They don't value sleep. And we're not able to do the work at all. Forget doing it well. You're not able to do the work at all if you don't take the time to take care of yourself and be kind to yourself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it starts, you are the starting point. Being able to have empathy, right? And in some cases it's sympathy because we can't necessarily identify with everyone's journey, right?
That's fair.
But I think when we start with understanding that grace, it starts here, it
Yeah. Yeah.
starts at your home base, then you can offer that to others. Then that goes further than we can even imagine. But as you said, often we're drawn into that almost, what is it? Almost a hustle culture of like, we gotta grind this thing out.
Yes.
I have to burn the candles at both
Yes.
ends,
Right.
because somehow our worth is tied up in that. And I
Hmm.
have a little bit of wisdom. What is it? You can have not what is it? Knowledge versus wisdom. There are some people who have knowledge, but they're still
Yes.
seeking wisdom.
Yes.
We are in a space. We have access to all the knowledge that you can
Yes.
possibly imagine, but we are
Come on.
missing wisdom.
Missing the
So
wisdom.
I'm aiming, I'm trying to get all the wisdom I can. I've learned the hard way.
You all you get and get understanding. I'm right there
Get
with you for real.
understanding.
No doubt
Yes.
about it. No doubt about it. Speaking about understanding, talk to me a bit about the sort of preconceived notions, the misconceptions that people have when they hear about your work and serving unhoused communities. And how does your work at Church of Common Ground really interrupt those misconceptions?
That's a great question. What I've found over time, and I've been so fortunate to be able to lean into this side of my own personal journey, is that everyone not only has a story, right? But I feel called to providing a space to make sure that those who are unseen are seen, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lifting up the voices of the unheard. Often one can feel like, especially if when we're talking about a topic such as homelessness, it's almost,
Yeah.
I hate to use this word, but I think of the words like cooties. Elementary
Sure. Sure.
elementary school age kids, you were always, it was kind of the game, like you don't want anyone to touch you because you'll get,
Yeah, I don't want
goodies.
to get the cooties. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's even on an adult level, right? On a
Real.
human level, it may not be spoken,
Yeah.
but individuals tend to try to keep a barrier because they don't want to
Mhm.
get the cooties. They don't
No.
want to acknowledge that, hey, I'm perhaps one paycheck away from having that experience. Or there's this mindset that, oh, that could never be me, right? It's almost an arrogance. And so
Mhm.
how do you create a space of care where someone can say, wait, it's not about necessarily about me and my experience, but what is the shared human experience. And so what I find it has been so essential to my work, not just at Common Ground and just in how I move. And also I just finished a master's program this past year,
Terrific.
is developing language around something I call equitable third space. And what that looks like, right? This idea of equitable third space is understanding that we all are bringing something different to this space, right? Whether you may be able to have a resource that I don't have a resource to, but it is all the space in which where economics does not rule who can attend, it can be connected to the space. And so when we have that language, we have that understanding and tying that back into common ground, really fostering that environment of what does an equitable third space look like? Okay,
Yeah.
it looks like everyone has access to coffee, right? Everyone has access. Okay, you're not a coffee drinker. Perhaps you like hot chocolate. Okay, I
Yeah.
have hot water, right? Okay, you don't do hot chocolate or you don't do coffee. Well, I have tea that I can steep for you, making sure
Mhm.
there's this idea of hospitality. But hey, you don't have to be homeless to partake in this space, but we invite you to enter with care and share this space and create a community. And that's what has developed at Common Ground. We actually have a makeup as far as with our parishioners, our congregants of both housed and unhoused individuals. It's really beautiful.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I'm so glad to hear you bring up third spaces because I think that we are in such multiple crises, but particularly the crisis of losing third spaces. And I'd love if you would, Shereetha, if you could define third spaces for us and share why you believe that third spaces are so important.
Yeah. So let's take a moment. So when we talk about third space, we got to start at first space.
Come
Okay.
on, here
So
for it.
first space is going to be your home.
Right.
Okay. Second space is assumed to be like your job, right? Then when you get to third space, it's going to be your community driven spaces. It can be a church, it can be a social group. Often these particular gatherings or spaces, it costs money, right?
Yeah.
So, and which limits access. So when I talk about equitable third spaces, because I'm looking at it, I'm just like, I don't want economics. I don't want money to be the reason why someone can't connect and be in and build community. So when we get into this language around what makes an equitable third space, it's like, how can we make it available to everyone? Now, here, I bring up common ground, I bring up the work that's available where, we are a church without walls, but in truth, Chris, you and I met in an equitable third space.
No doubt about it.
We
That's the truth.
connected in New York at a storytelling through a storytelling cohort, which offered radical hospitality for us, and we
Yes, you
were able
did.
to come in and be storytellers and try to figure out how to write a letter to the future, right?
I love it.
And
Yes.
because of an equitable third space, here we are having this conversation.
No doubt. That's exactly it. Now that I did not think at the beginning of this question that we were an example of the benefit
Yes,
of third
yeah.
spaces, but thank you for bringing that to light. That's so real. That's
And
so
it
real.
requires generosity. I think if we can get past this idea of if I put, too much in, then someone else is going to benefit. Good. I want you to benefit.
Yes.
I want
Yeah.
you to be well. And I think if
Right.
we have that mindset of wanting others to be well, and it's not necessarily to my own detriment, there's
Yeah.
so much can expand. And it's not just for spiritual communities. I think it's
Right.
for humanity. I like to talk about shared humanity a great deal. Yeah, we are an example of equitable third space and what that
Mhm.
looks like.
No doubt. So you brought up the storytelling cohort that we were part of. One of my favorite events of 2024. That was so
Yeah.
great. It was
Yeah.
so dope meeting you and all other just like really brilliant, just extraordinary people in that room. And I want to know how storytelling it has, and particularly just like the stories you've heard, the stories you've told, how have they shaped your understanding of community and belonging? Like just thinking about story time in a classroom to The way that we're telling stories in different ways, like, how has that shaped your understanding of this work?
I mean, I grew up in a family of storytellers. The first person that comes to mind is my grandfather. You know, he was a man of few words because he
Mm,
got things done. But when there was a time in which he could have leisure, it wasn't necessarily every day. He was a man of laughter as well. And so storytelling often encompassed this idea that broke out into robust laughter and joy. It was a passing down of oral history of who you are. It was finding ways to be entertained, right? When your means may be limited. As a child, I didn't understand that because I had everything I could need, right? Looking back, I can be honest, we were poor, or in the true saying, poor. Okay.
I feel you. I feel you.
So, but I never felt lack because storytelling was a part
Yeah.
of that. And
Yeah.
often those stories took place around a meal. And when you put that together, it's no surprise that I'm doing the work that I'm doing because that in itself was radical hospitality, having a grandmother or and my mother who would make sure no matter what that was food available, that love was put into those meals, and having again with my family dynamic, my grandfather making sure this is a off the subject just a little bit, but I'll tell you that as for a childhood experience, my grandfather, I grew up in the rural South, okay, in the country, okay.
Gotcha.
My hometown has one stoplight, one to this day. We have more cattle crossing signs than we do traffic lights. I need you to understand where I'm coming from, Chris.
You're
Okay.
giving us the context.
I'll give you the context. So from a little place called Franklin, Georgia. Okay. But it's so small we can't even say Franklin. It's a part you say the county, and it's Heard County. Giving a shout out to my hometown. And
Got to.
everyone when I say it, oh, I've never heard of Heard County. Now you have. So okay. So I grew up in the country, and my grandfather, he would catch things like rabbits and so on and so forth. Now I had a limit. Like I'm just like, I need to be able to identify. I grew
Mhm.
up with cows and things of that nature in rural area. And there was one evening in which my grandmother was cooking something in the kitchen, and I decided to come into the kitchen. My grandfather was sitting at the counter, sitting at the table, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm the only grandchild around. Let me see if I can get a taste. Like, something smells good. It's very well
Sure.
seasoned." And my grandmother's looking at me like, "What are you doing?" So I kind of cozy up to my grandfather, and he's looking down at me, and I'm looking, and I'm like, I want to try what you're having, and it's fried. And I'm being very clear to explain. I'm thinking like I want to try what you're having because as a child, I'm thinking this is chicken. Looks like chicken, has been battered, fried. The seasoning. My senses are telling me this is chicken. Well, let me tell you, it was not chicken. And I learned the hard way because I bit into it and I said, "Whoa, that's not chicken." And I don't know about your background. We didn't waste food.
Right.
Okay. We did not
Right.
waste food. So I knew that I had literally bit off more than I could chew.
Come
Well,
on.
let me tell you what I had bitten into. Turtle.
Wow. Not chicken.
But if there again, take away from this episode, turtle is not chicken. Okay.
No. No.
But in the spirit of radical hospitality, I now have a story and an experience that I will not forget. My grandfather had mercy on me and he took the turtle. I almost said chicken. He took the turtle and he ate it because he saw me suffering through because I was pushing through.
Come on.
I
Trying to
was
do your
pushing.
best.
I was doing the best that I could, but that just was not for me. But that is what, when we talk about storytelling and understanding, for me, it's cultural. It's also important to approach it through a lens of dignity as well. So that's significant. I think it's just essential. And again, that's how I've gotten to where I am with the work that I'm doing with Common Ground and just as a whole, how I move.
And I love that you lift up dignity because I often think about the ways in which stories are told and they're not, whether it's like malice or just ignorance, it's still painful to see them centering folks in a way that does not honor their dignity, right? That makes a mockery of them. And I really am curious to know, how do you help those, particularly those who you serve, reclaim their voices and share their own narratives with that dignity that we just spoke about?
Well, one, it has taken time. I have built trust and a relationship, rapport.
Mm,
That is essential. And I do not take that for granted at all. And so this is a two-part answer for me because on one hand, through my work with Common Ground, we realized at the height of the pandemic that having a spiritual community is essential.
yeah.
Having that what I now call an equitable third space, it has a value that goes beyond any sort of metrics that we can
Mhm.
measure. But what we realized was that prayer requires action. And part of that looked like, how can we, because I'm not a social worker, okay?
Mm,
And the community that I serve needs social workers and needs someone who
yes.
can have access to resources that I may not be privy to. Again, I can pray for you, right? I can make a phone call. I can stay on the line with Social Security. I can try to direct you, but I don't have access to all the tools. So in January of 2022, we took a financial leap of faith and we brought on a social worker and organically embedded them into our programming. And why that's important is because our social worker is a street barista. They serve coffee, they sit down and listen,
There
they
it
pray,
is.
right? So while we are, having our meetings, connecting in person, fellowshipping, all those things. I have a social worker on my staff who's able to check in with folks and get them logged in. We can follow up on what their housing process is. And so since January of 2022, we've now helped house over 150 people in our community to put them on a path to permanent housing. Whereas I have folks who, prior to me starting at this organization, who some had been homeless almost a decade, and now we can
Goodness.
say they're housed, and that isn't to speak to a lack of effort from anyone else, but this
Right.
particular path, it works. And so to have over 150 individuals now in housing, having received housing, and what's really essential about it and why it works is because they have a community.
Yeah.
They have a community to stay connected with. I serve a very transient community where people, you may see them today and you might not see them ever again. That is life, right? But if they have something that grounds them,
Hmm.
right? Something that they can connect to, right? This model works. And sometimes your pathway to housing can take over a year. I want you to think about that. Over over a year.
Goodness.
And it's not for a lack of trying. It's not for a
Right.
lack of trying. So because of that, we have a success rate. And the second part of that, in you asking about how this just connecting to community aspect, but I wanted to lift up a personal project that I have as far as with storytelling. It's called
Yes.
Agency. It's an
Okay.
archive that I've been building since the beginning of my work at Common Ground. As I talked about building this relationship with folks, it
Mhm.
has taken time, but they trust me enough with their story to take their picture, to learn, their backgrounds, to honor, whatever that moment is. It could be them having a cup of coffee. Sometimes we sit down and we have interviews, whatever it takes. But this has been a personal project of mine where I've started to build out an archive of these photos, and it's my offering as well back to this community and back to the city of Atlanta to
Mm.
show that yes, homelessness is a critical issue.
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
it is also one that could be told again, not through a lens with dignity. And so my archive actually digitally houses the stories of folks who are unhoused or who have been impacted by the unhoused experience.
absolutely. My goodness, that's, you know, when you say that, I'm just struck by, when we talk about folks being transient, it
Mhm.
made me think about the way in which those who are housed can sort of anticipate and expect certain things that unhoused folks are just consistently on the move for. Like we open up the conversation talking about walking 10 miles, and it makes you think about like all the stigmas that people place on the unhoused community. And I often push back and say, how would you act if you weren't certain you knew what you're going to have for lunch today, much less where you're going to sleep tonight?
Yes.
And where you're gonna sleep tomorrow night. Like it's always going to have to change. Like that would wear anyone down. You know?
Yeah. And what I am struck I think what struck me the most in learning more and more about the unhoused experience, we have to be clear. It is not something that you can endure alone. You
No.
have to have some sort of structure, some sort of community, because even when it comes down to your possessions, and you may
Yes.
need to try to go to the restroom or you can't carry your bags into a certain place, you have to
Right.
have someone you trust. And hey, I am for, but look, we must have faith, right? If you are an individual of faith, I'm with you on that. But I'm in Atlanta, and let me tell you, even all the faith in the world, you can leave something sitting
It's
somewhere,
gonna
it
be
will
me.
not be there
It's
when
gonna
you
be
get
me.
back. Okay, it will not be there. So you have this very visceral experience that one
Mhm.
is going through, and so many try to go it alone. So there's a level of loneliness that is probably harsher than the actual experience itself of
Mhm.
the unknown, the unknowing of where I'm going to get the meal, but the loneliness factor. And that's why, I bring up the topic of equitable third spaces and why they're so essential, because you cannot, in anything in this world, you cannot do it alone. Community is essential.
It's vital. Like we are not in this by ourselves. We cannot afford to be in this by ourselves. But I have a question for you, thinking about the folks who, whether they like see the work or maybe even critique the work, or how are you engaging with people who, it's one thing for you and I to be speaking and being on the same page, but if there are people who are saying like, hey, I don't know why you're handing out coffee in the middle of the street, they don't see this as a concern of theirs. Like, how do you engage folks like?
Well, I can't make someone have a concern, but I can extend an invitation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that is what's so important about having a space and calling it a church without walls,
Yeah,
understanding it's removing barriers. When I talk
yeah,
about radical hospitality, it's removing barriers. And
yeah,
so what I have found, and I've had individuals who didn't get it,
yeah.
just it didn't land, but I extended the invitation to come and be in community. And I think with any sort of experience, if you are willing to open yourself to an experience, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
have to remove any preconceived notions that we have about what it can be. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that puts us in a place where we have to question what we thought things were going to be. Like, again, as I told you, the most challenging part of my job has been the foot clinic. I had a lot of
Oh,
preconceived
yeah, yeah,
notions about what that was going to be. Some of them were true, okay,
yeah, fair.
but that experience has surpassed anything that I
Mm-hmm.
could tell you about what ministry looks like, what it means to be a human being, how I see community. Part of my own personal journey, in being a cancer survivor, is that I live with chronic pain. I have nerve damage in my legs and feet, primarily from chemotherapy. So it's not lost on me that I spend my time taking care of others' feet
That's
and
something.
having this true empathy of understanding when someone tells me that they have nerve damage or
Yeah.
what it means that, for to have an ache in that
Yes.
way. But I had to say yes to an experience that again, I told you, I said no.
That's right. Couple times.
but but you have to be willing. So it's not I had to learn. Again, we have a mutual understanding, a desire to
Mm.
say we want to see the world look this way or ideally be better in this way.
Mm.
But for those who we may not be on the same page, just like I have an experience, I understand they have an experience, and I find that invitation is
Right.
key. So I invite those who may have a different perspective to venture past that perceived barrier, which does not exist because it's a church without walls. And sometimes that invitation can change the way folks see the world around them.
No question about it. Yeah, and I do think that there's something about having your ignorance dispelled that does change you. You know, the things that we don't know about that we were so convinced about. There's something about being exposed to say, oh, everything I was talking about, I got to revamp it.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, again, I won't harp on it, but I know God in a different way. Now that I wash feet, that is a different relationship. And I'm not downplaying, I'm not trying to but it is a humbling experience. It's humbling because also people are coming to us in a very vulnerable state. Okay. And so, if again, we talk about shared humanity, if anyone has ever been vulnerable, that I can understand. And that's why I go back to, I have projects that are shaped around the shared experience of eating. I tell you, we talk about, if someone doesn't understand, like, I don't get why you're serving coffee. Well, you may not be a coffee drinker, but say that you are. Did you not enjoy that cup of coffee this morning? And
Come
like,
on.
why would, let's not deny that opportunity for someone else. Just a quick circle back, because we were talking about third spaces. We talked about
Mhm.
first space and second space. First space being home, right? When we look at this through the lens of someone who is impacted by homelessness, first space doesn't exist,
Doesn't exist.
right?
Come on. Right.
Second space, it's assumed that it doesn't exist. It is assumed that someone who is experiencing homelessness does not work. And that is often not the case. So
Case.
many times, folks who are on their way to work, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
they need a cup of coffee.
Right.
And that's where that equitable third space comes in.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
again, perspective.
So someone may be watching this, listening to this, and they feel motivated. How can they start? What small, meaningful way can a person practice radical hospitality in their own
Um,
lives?
Goodness, what a great question. I think you reach out to the people who are already doing it. I think sometimes we think we have to reinvent the wheel,
No doubt.
right? To be a change maker doesn't mean that you have to completely change how things are done. Find
Mm.
organizations that are doing this. I'm happy to be a resource and happy to
Mm.
share my handles. I'm at Shereetha Jackson on all social media platforms. Reach out. We got we got a little noise going on there, but reach out to me. I don't know if that was excitement for the Holy Ghost coming in.
It's like the
Saying to
wind, rushing
the
wind.
wind, the Russian wind. Yes. Reach out to me. If you have questions about what an equitable third space or what radical hospitality can look like for you and your community, if you're in the Atlanta area, happy to connect in those ways. But find organizations that are already doing these things, and then
Yes.
perhaps it can grow. It does not, I think that sometimes we can talk ourselves out of doing something because we can get in our heads about, I have to do this and now I got to create. Showing up, what is it? Showing up is half the battle. So
Half the
show up,
battle.
show up.
That's it. That's it. Indeed. So definitely want to encourage you all. I'll connect with Shereetha to get all of the right contact information. We'll put in the episode notes for this. But this has been a joy. This has been a pleasure. God bless your
Thank
work.
you.
God bless you all at Church of the Common Ground. And thank you all for watching and listening. Of course, you can see this at baddestchaplain.com and go ahead and support us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any and everywhere where you get podcasts. Until next time, do take care. Thank you so much. Be kind. Peace. Hey, what's going on, y'all? Y'all know what it is. Baddest Chaplain on the globe here once again. Hoping all is well with you and yours. Today, I'm here with my dear friend, Kate Enderly. Kate, how you doing?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well also. Doing well also. It's been a minute, but it's really glad to see you. Yo. Really wonderful to see you.
Yeah. 20 something years to be exact, right? Like,
Oof, man. Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. If you want to put a number to it.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was sobering right there. I didn't even think about it being like that. I was like, oh, a few years, but not like a couple decades.
20 years.
Different. Absolute. But I'm really excited to talk to you, particularly about your work with Black and Borderless. So just walk us through as an audience, like, what inspired you to create Black and Borderless? This platform that's connecting African people of African descent around the world. Like, what was the inspiration for that?
I would say I always tell people that me. So a little bit about my background. My father is an African immigrant, specifically a Cameroonian of Cameroonian descent. He came in from Cameroon, which is a small country in Central Africa, and migrated to the U.S. in the late 70s, early 80s, where he met my mother, who's African-American, a Black American woman from Chicago. So I'm the product of literally a transnational collaboration between people of African descent, an African immigrant parent, and an African-American mother. So I like to tell people that I was kind of born into this, right? Like I was, God doesn't make mistakes, as they say. So that's where my inspiration comes from. And because I have grown with these two cultures, I've had a chance to kind of see the commonalities between the two cultures and also the differences and the nuances. So I think I'm best positioned more than anybody else to really be the person that kind of bridges the gap between people of African descent from, different cultures and from different backgrounds. So really just my personal background and how I've grown up and how, I got to live with my grandparents in Cameroon for several years when I was younger, for 8 years, and then came back to the States. So I'm truly bicultural, and I know how it's enriched my life, and I want to see that same enrichment happen for Africa and the diaspora at large.
Mm-hmm. There it is. So when you talk about it enriching the diaspora at large, like, what are the ways that you see it contributing to this, global solidarity, like Pan-African work? Like how do you see it contributing in that, in those regards?
I think one, from an emotional, kind of social standpoint, there's a lot of healing I think that needs to happen between people of African descent. Given the history of, slavery and the slave trade, and even in how Black immigrants in the U.S. currently interact with African Americans, or Black immigrants in Europe interact with, those who were born and raised there or second generation. There are some clashes that are happening there. I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of finger pointing that's happening based on our history, who betrayed whom, and all of that. I think from a social standpoint, that needs to happen. But what I'm seeing happen, especially in the last 10 years, that there's an economic shift that needs to happen as well. I think the most recent things that really point to the fact that we need to come together is the recent cuts by USAID.
Right.
It's not just, the U.S. Although the U.S. is getting, I think, the most publicity for cutting foreign aid to Africa, European countries are doing it as well.
Right.
And that leaves Africans trying to kind of figure out what the next move is. How do they, function as an autonomous continent economically and financially? At the same time, that's happening in Western nations as well for Black folks in Western nations. As we know here, the rollback of DEI initiatives in the West is also leaving people of African descent in the West kind of wondering, like, what's the next thing? What's the way forward for us? And how do we kind of, create a self-sufficient, autonomous ecosystem for Black people? So I think these two things are happening on the continent and the diaspora, and it's high time. This is the time that we need to get together, not just socially, but economically. Explain the way I'm kind of talking about Black and Borderless now is not as a social movement, but as an economic movement. It's an attempt to create a global Black economy. That's essentially where it's kind of evolving and where I'm trying to take it. So I think those are kind of the two things. Social, on the social side, which we already kind of know about, but also on the economic side, like it's everything is pointing in the direction of an autonomous global Black economy that we need to create. And this is the time to do it, given all that's happening in the world.
It's amazing to hear you say this, because I think about all the ways that it feels like we're being programmed and what you're presenting and providing is a real counter narrative. Because I see when I used to use Twitter all the time, and there would be like diaspora wars, and people arguing about who has the best jollof, and is jollof better than rice and peas, and all these different like trivial things that like should be funny, but people are getting like real serious about to your point, and just thinking about the ways in which this initiative that you're doing is happening at the same time as like we're seeing African economies grow. We're seeing African leaders really make some concerted efforts to really make sure that they're controlling their own economy. And when we're talking about the continent of Africa, we're talking about the youngest continent with the fastest growing population in the world. So it's a lot of opportunities in the mix for it, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you hear all of that, when we think about all that, like what to you is like the importance of being Black and borderless, right? As we're talking about something that is like transnational, like what does that mean to you on a deeper level to be Black and borderless?
Literally it means, being able to think about whether it be your profession, your culture, as something that's borderless, that's not bound by geographic or national borders, right? Because it's not. Black culture is not bound by, the borders of the U.S. or even the borders of the African continent. So I think in kind of the literal way, it's like to think about the fact that your culture transcends borders and that it's also influencing other cultures in other parts of the world as well. So in that sense, it's borderless. But it also, I think, kind of a more figurative meaning, I guess, if that's the word that I want to go for, is that you yourself are borderless and boundless, in terms of your potential and what you can do. So it has a kind of double entendre. It's supposed to mean literally that, culturally, your culture is not just, U.S. and that you can reach across borders and connect with Black people of African descent from other parts of the world and collaborate with them and build things with them and solve problems with them. But also it's that you as a person, you are boundless and you are borderless. And when you approach your life that way, you can do really great things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really appreciate that because I think about, once again, how counter culture that is and how much that counters the narrative of people just, whenever you're a marginalized person, like you're just forced to think about things in a very provincial manner. Right. And so, I think about all the times I've had conversations where we're trying to talk about, like, whether it was in college and talking about Darfur or previous generations talking about South Africa, and just thinking about the ways somebody would say, well, what does that have to do with me here? Like, I'm here in America, I'm here in North Carolina, I'm here in New York, wherever the place may be. And just thinking about expanding, and it feels like a return to that sort of like, solidarity across the world that is so needed. It has always been needed, but particularly needed at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that solidarity has always kind of been there, but at a very elitist kind of level.
Yes.
Like African Americans have been going to Africa, traveling to the Caribbean for decades. Right. If you look at kind of the Black Power movement of the 60s and the 70s, people were, taking on African fashion and wearing and going back, but it was kind of reserved at that time for, I would say, like middle and upper class African Americans to a certain extent, or so-called conscious African Americans.
That part.
What I've observed, like, what I've seen happening in culture in like the last, I would say, like decade or two, is that that's like permeating working class and, lower middle class people of color, not just kind of, this kind of conscious, go back to Africa movement. And that's thanks to, social media and digital, media. People can now, you could go on TikTok and watch someone eating fufu in Nigeria in your reels. And you're like, well, how did this end up in my, in my feed? You can, see someone talking about their vacation to Jamaica, and then you now decide that. But, that information wasn't as accessible, of course, before pre-social media. So now people who didn't even have the means to travel or didn't have the means to even come in contact with someone, a Black person of a different cultural background, now have it, right?
Yeah.
So the movement is like now become a mass movement. It's not just reserved for the socially conscious, elitist kind of Black person. I think that's what's really remarkable about this time and what makes this time the time to really solidify the solidarity.
Yes.
And now convert that or transform that into economic power, not just social power.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I love that you mentioned traveling to Jamaica, because something I see on like my For You page every once in a while is a picture of Dr. King relaxing in Jamaica, and there's some
Seen
quote
that.
of like he feels the most free he's ever felt in Jamaica, and like Jamaicans
Uh-huh.
are super proud of this notion. Man, it's free here.
Yeah,
Like there's
yeah, yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of that going on.
yeah.
So,
I have seen
absolutely.
those pictures actually. Funny enough that you say that. I've seen that. His vacation in Jamaica.
He looks so relaxed. He's just like
He
sitting in the
does,
pool.
like in kind of the 1960s fashion clothing. Like you
That's
see him
right. That's right.
relaxed with a white shirt. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's really cool.
It
But
is.
that just tells you that back then that was already happening, right? But again,
Right,
Dr.
right.
King, one could say, was a privileged, not privileged socially, but privileged economically or financially
Once
at that
again,
point.
yeah, right.
So to afford that, to be able to go,
Mhm.
like how many black people were traveling to Jamaica in the
Come
60s and
on.
70s.
Right.
But now, I can name at least 10 people in my social circle,
Certainly.
varying like backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, who have been to Jamaica or are planning a
Mm.
trip to Jamaica. I think that's just kind of the beauty of it, is that social media and digital media has made that possible, and also increased migration. The
Yes.
migration kind of boom in the early 90s to mid 90s from the Caribbean and from
Mhm.
Africa. More people are exposed to people from the
Right.
Caribbean
For
and
sure.
from Africa. They're eating at Jamaican restaurants
Mhm.
in Brooklyn and Bronx
Mhm.
and Chicago. So that also has contributed to it. And I think, again, that's what makes this the exact time to really capitalize on that and build this global Black economy that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What also comes to mind is the sort of uh year of return that I know Ghana had back in, what was that, 2019, 2021, around that time.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about the ways, and of course the programs that many nations on the continent have had to allow Africans to travel freely between states without needing a visa, and just seeing, there seems to be an alignment happening with, this conversation that we're having, as well as laws and sort of like geopolitics sort of playing into this like economic opportunity to really do business and be with each other, not just see each other on TikTok, but actually physically touch the
Yes.
soil.
Yep. 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 There is. And again, that's really a beautiful thing to see. Ghana is kind of, has been the country spearheading that movement of, inviting the diaspora back, inviting them to not just travel there, but invest there. That's kind of the second wave, I think, of the return movement, is to
Mhm.
also invest there. And I think other countries are following suit. They're seeing that it's
Mhm.
working, and they're also
Mhm.
following suit and doing the same. I've seen things about Gambia and people,
Yeah,
encouraging investment in Gambia because they're seeing that, what's happening in Ghana and places like that. So I just think it's wonderful to see. And I think that if we don't capitalize on that momentum that we're building now, we might lose it. So I think that's it, especially those of us in the diaspora. If you yourself, you are of Jamaican descent,
that's right.
I guess I would say a first generation American, right?
Mhm.
So you and I, who've grown up here and who are, can claim ties to, other parts of the world. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that momentum doesn't get lost, and it gets converted into something bigger than what it is. That it's not just a cultural movement, that it's not just a TikTok exchange
Exactly.
or a jollof rice or a rice and peas war,
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, for sure. But just to talk to me a bit about how you believe your work with Black and Borderless is helping to address the historic displacing people of African descent. Like we just talked about being first generation Americans and having to maneuver that sort of third culture. Like I know, like having met you in college, I remember, and you coming from Chicago and me coming from New York, I remember just seeing, West Indians and Africans all the time. Like, and it just was really kind of a shock to the system to go to school in the South and be like, oh, y'all aren't used to like different types of Black people. Like this
right,
is,
right,
y'all just like, the African American was the only slice. And it was like, there's so
right.
much more. And I remember, feeling such a joy and peace being able to like kick it with African students. Like I remember being on like a group chat with like some Ghanaian students. This is when we still used AIM, and they
No,
were speaking pidgin, and I was like, "Oh, y'all speak Patois?" And I was just like writing back, and they're like, "How do you know pidgin?" I was like, "How do you know Patois?"
that is
Yeah,
funny. Well, let me share. I
yeah.
have a similar story. So
Faith,
I have a really eclectic family, to say the
here
least,
for it.
right? So my mother is African American, born and raised
Mhm.
in Chicago.
No doubt.
But in the late 80s, she discovered Jamaica. She went on vacation there in like 88
Come on.
to Negril and fell in love
Yes.
with Jamaica and has made it her second home. Really, it's become almost her first home. And now Chicago's her
Come
second home.
on.
So
Yeah,
she
yeah.
spends like 6 months out of the year typically in Jamaica and the other 6 in
Yeah.
Chicago. She kind of goes back and forth,
Awesome.
right? But she's
Awesome.
from Chicago.
Right,
But
right.
she speaks patois now because she's been there
Because
for
she's
so
been
long.
so long.
Yes. So she speaks patois. And then I took some of my Cameroon relatives to Jamaica recently. I had my 40th
Yeah.
birthday party in the grill.
Awesome.
And we were speaking pidgin. People were understanding what we were saying. We're speaking because Cameroonians speak pidgin
Right.
too.
Right.
And they can understand us. I kept telling, I've been telling them for years that there's similarities. I can understand patois, parts of it, because of my West African background. Like,
Right.
I'll give you a word. Pekin in West Africa, West African pidgin is child.
Yeah,
In
picnic. Yes.
pygmy, yes. So my mother, like, when she started taking me to Jamaica, I would understand patois, parts of it. And she was like,
Yeah.
why? I was like, yeah, because I speak West African pidgin, so I can pick up something. You did it. It's in pidgin is you did it. You did it, yeah. I did
You
it.
did it.
Yes, yeah.
I did.
So I understand parts of it. So it's just funny how there's so many similarities, and you'd be surprised how people don't realize it until they come into contact with another person and they go, oh wait, this is similar. Like, people are not, again, it's only because of social media that people have become even more educated about these similarities and these things. And it's beautiful to see it happen. I don't know if you saw, there was many viral videos like this, but the most recent one is of a Haitian band. I think they're like a band or something, and they were playing compa, like and a Nigerian lady. I'm confused about whether the Nigerian lady is related to one of the bandmates or something, but the caption was something about how similar compa is to some polyrhythmic, music genres of West Africa. And she was dancing to compa, and this became a whole thread about Nigerians talking about how similar compa sounds to Afro beats and things like that. That video went viral. Like, they were like mixing it with Nigerian Afro beats and everything, mixing the compa with it. But I'm seeing so many of those examples, so many of those videos going viral on social media. People go, oh, wait, you guys, you listen to that? Oh, wait, that kind of sounds like compa. Oh, that sounds like Afro beats. There's this wild exchange happening. Like what you're describing happening at Davidson in our college days is happening now on a much bigger,
much larger scale.
And it's remarkable to see it. I don't remember what your question was. I just wanted to call that out.
No, this is a vibe now. I forgot my question too. Throw that away. Because you got me thinking about a couple things. Like, one, I thought about Honorable Louise Bennett, who should be a Jamaican national hero and isn't yet, but she should be. And she taught often about the African roots of the Jamaican dialect. So, for example, we will say in like dirt, but that's also a tree word from the Kan people in Ghana. So there's a lot of connections in that sense. But then when you talked about compa, it made me think about how obsessed I've been all year with Bad Bunny's latest album, and just listening to it. And at first I was saying to my wife, I was like, maybe it's just like the Taino blood is just flowing between both of us. I was like, this is just speaking to us in the same way. But there's so much of the songs on that album, especially this one song called Café Con Ron. I was like, I just feel this. I don't know what he's saying in Spanish.
Right.
I just feel it on a spiritual level, the connection to this music. I'm like, I don't know why I like this song so much, but I love it.
Yeah. And you're not the only one. I hear that from so many people. Like, hey, I don't understand what's being said here, but as a Black person, I feel it. Like, we think about Afro beats with artists like Davido.
Come on.
And Burna Boy, Thames, Wizkid. And they're doing lots of collaborations, like transnational collaborations with artists in Jamaica and other parts of the world. Drake with, I think, like Popcorn and things like that. So those collaborations are already happening, and I think the music industry has already caught on to it, and they're capitalizing on it. So they figured out how to make, in the music industry, they figured out how to kind of, join these artists. Usher and what's this guy's Afrobeats artist name in Nigeria? Come to Me. They recently did a song together. So they see that happening in culture, and they're capitalizing on it. And I think that we are almost the last. We who are living this every day. We're not actually capitalizing on this, and that's what Black and Borderless aims to do. Is to do that. There's a chapter 2 of Black and Borderless. I'm evolving it into something that I want to talk about, but I want you to get your questions out first before I talk.
No, it's all good. It's all good because it sounds like you're doing out from my lens. Like, this is like soul care work. This is healing work for the community. So what role do you see Black and Borderless in that role of healing so much of the journey, the trauma? It's not easy to migrate to a place. It's not easy to be displaced from a place. What role do you see Black and Borderless in play in terms of like the healing between expats, Black expats, and migrants?
So this is going to sound very like practical and not, conscious or whatever,
Here
but I think
for
I'm
it.
a very practical stage, I think, in my life. I don't know if it's
Okay.
about me being 40 and just thinking like from an economic standpoint at all points.
Sure.
But I think that healing can happen. And I think there are organizations that already exist that,
Mhm,
are doing so. Even
mhm,
just,
mhm.
like I said, Ghana, just as, with the, pushing the return of people of the diaspora, I think is already doing that to a great extent,
Right, right.
encouraging travel to Africa. Where I see a space is in the economic part.
Yes.
That's why I see the white space right now. So what I'm trying to evolve Black and Borderless into is almost an organization that helps make economic partnerships or facilitate economic partnerships. And specifically, because I work in, excuse me, my kids are giving me a
Mhm.
bad cold. Because I work in comms and communications, PR, marketing, that's kind of, my day job and what I do. What I want to start off doing is creating almost like an advertising or communications agency that helps people who are business owners in the diaspora
Mhm,
market their products to those on the continent and vice
mhm,
versa.
mhm.
And even within the diaspora, like from, the US to the Caribbean and other parts of the
Got you.
world.
Got you.
So I think that the healing that you're talking about, the social healing, I think that's already being done on a really grand scale by lots of really
Mhm,
awesome organizations. And I initially started in that space, but I'm realizing that it's a little bit crowded and I'll just kind of adding to the noise of that space.
mhm.
And I think where I guess you can call it economic healing needs to happen, economic
Yeah, yeah,
collaboration needs to happen for us to really, really move forward. And that's a space that I really want to play in the next 5 to 10 years.
yeah. I hear that. I hear that. So for someone who's watching this and listening to this, and they're also a practical minded person, like what are some practical ways people can begin building those connections? Like this all sounds amazing, but for that
Uh-huh,
person who hasn't yet traveled outside of the
uh-huh,
US even, like
uh-huh.
what can they do before, or really to prepare themselves for
Yeah.
this sort of exchange?
I say start with your profession or start with what you're already doing. As I said, I had to start from my profession. I said, okay, I had
Mhm,
this grand, dream to, reconcile, the African diaspora, but that's pretty big, right?
mhm,
What about if I start from my trade, what I do best, or what I'm already doing, which is that I'm a marketing communications person? What if I create
mhm.
an ad agency that
Right.
helps these brands, African American owned or Black owned brands in the US connect
Mhm.
with consumers in the US? So I think with every person, they need to do that exercise of, okay, what am I already doing? And then how can
Mhm.
now that apply that to the healing or to the solidarity of people of African descent?
Yeah.
So you as your work, you work in your ministry or as a
Mhm.
chaplain. How do you make that connection? Is it that connect with other people doing similar work in Africa, and you guys start a joint ministry?
Right, right,
I,
right.
I think on a very practical level, is to start with what you're good at, because when you start kind
Mhm.
of bigger, it becomes overwhelming, and you feel like
Yeah,
you can't solve it. But when you start with what
no
you're
doubt.
already doing, you say, okay, so I'm X, Y, and Z. I'm a chaplain. I'm a PR professional. I'm a doctor.
Mhm.
What can I do? Who are my counterparts in other parts of the world who are of African descent that I can collaborate with, and what problems can we solve together?
Come on, come on.
And that's another thing that I want to talk about, that there's so many common problems that I think that are shared between people of African descent. Right now, I'm working on a series that I'm trying to pitch to a few publications where, um, let's say an environmental activist in Louisiana connects
Mhm.
with an environmental activist in Ghana in the Volta region.
Shit. Right, right,
And
right,
this is
right.
actually a real partnership. So it's not like a
What's that? That's real
hypothetical thing.
stuff. That's real stuff.
Yeah,
That's real
it's the
stuff.
Cancer Alley region in Louisiana that is a
Yeah,
predominantly Black area that,
right.
due to industrial pollution, people there were, of course, unfortunately getting sick. And in the Volta, the Volta River in Ghana, there's been
Yes.
pollution in the Volta River, and there's an activist there.
Clothes washing up. Right.
Yes. So this is a similar problem that people in, opposite corners of the world almost,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But two people of African descent who are facing the same issue,
That's
the
right.
same form of marginalization, who are fighting for the same cause. How do you bring
Mm-hmm.
those two people together, and how can they help each other solve their respective issues and come together? So I think every person needs to do that exercise. Every person of African descent needs to ask myself, what am I doing in my country? And
Mm-hmm.
is someone who's Black, who's on another part of the world experiencing the same issue? And how can I collaborate
Mm-hmm.
with them to solve this issue?
Right.
I think that that's where you can really start from.
Yeah. I love that. I truly love that. So tell us a bit about you previewed it earlier, but like tell us a bit about that chapter 2 where you see
Okay.
Black and Borderless Chapter 2? Because I was intrigued.
I'm previewing something that I haven't launched yet, Chris, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's what
Exclusive.
I do.
Exclusive.
Yes.
Here we
Yeah. You
go.
heard it here first.
Exactly.
So, no, I essentially want to create a global Black advertising and PR agency. I've worked in advertising and PR agencies my entire career, for most of my career, I would say, not my entire career, but, and I see a white space there. I see really awesome agencies playing, catering to African American consumers, maybe with some global presence. And I see really great advertising agencies catering to consumers on the continent. And so it's like kind of siloed, I feel like, at this point. And I don't see, and I could be wrong, maybe there's one out there, but from the audit that I've done, I don't see one that actually goes to brands and says, hey, I can help you reach a global Black market. Like you can come to us and I can help you find consumers, not just in the US, but in Africa, and, kind of identify different segments for you and create this kind of global Black consumer ecosystem for you. I've not seen that yet. And I think that there's a white space for that. And again, I'm choosing that because I have expertise in that space, right? And it feels like an authentic space for me to play in. And there's a wide space there that I can really own. And as I always say, communication can't be taken for granted. If you're going to build a global Black economy, the people in that economy need to be able to communicate with each other, right? As they trade goods and sell their goods. So I feel like I'm playing a role in creating that economy by helping people communicate their goods and services across borders, essentially. So that's chapter 2. That's where I'm going.
That's so exciting to me. You started talking and I just pictured like my brain started thumbing through an Ebony magazine and just seeing all like the ads in it and just thinking about the ways in which that sort of space that you're describing is so desperately needed. Like Black people the world over are doing incredible, remarkable, brilliant things, but it's like a tree that falls in the forest and no one's there to observe it. You know what I mean? Like we need that infrastructure, and PR plays a large part in that to make sure that our greatness is being distributed in the way it needs to be distributed. You know?
To each other, yes, not just like to the world, but to each other. Yeah. Like you need to know that there's, a product in Ghana, a hair product. If you're looking for a product for your beard.
Right.
I'm thinking of you today, Chris. But
I appreciate you. I can, this don't stay moisturized by itself.
If you want to stay moisturized, you need to know that there's a product in, by some manufacturer or some, entrepreneur in Ghana who creates products for, beard oil for men, and you should be able to access that. Why can't you have access to that? That's how we, create this kind of economic relationship between people who have, the same skin color as us but live in another part of the world. So why are we not doing more of that? So communication plays a huge role in that. Right.
Absolutely. So just thinking about this journey and being able to like communicate your vision, here with the exclusive, but like even everything you've done thus far with Black and Borderless, what has it taught you about what's possible, especially when people of African descent come together across borders?
It's taught me that just, simply great things are possible when people of African descent come together. I've witnessed it in my own life, like I said, from my family background.
Yes.
Look, I'm one of them. I'm just kidding.
Right. That's real. No, talk your talk. I'll vouch for that.
I'm one of the good things that come through such a collaboration.
Exactly.
No, but on a serious note, I've witnessed it time and time again. During my school days, even the collaboration between, like you said, Caribbean students and African students on campus, I've seen that happen. And I've seen great projects come out of that. I'm seeing, even when there isn't any collaboration, just on social media, as I said, these kinds of, viral videos and things happening, even those things feel really great and grand. Something as simple as a compa artist and a Nigerian coming together and making music. We're seeing it on the charts in music. We're seeing that happen. Like, big hits are being rolled out musically because of these collaborations.
That's right.
So it's happening. We just need to, like I said, leverage it economically and, create an autonomous Black economy, as lofty as that sounds.
No, right. It's to me, I don't think a dream is worth pursuing if it doesn't seem impossible. Like if you have a dream that's like easily attainable, you're not dreaming big enough.
Yep, absolutely. So it should scare you a little bit. Like you should be a little scared. Yeah.
It should. You should be like, what's going to happen? Like you should feel that.
Right.
Otherwise,
you should feel it in your chest a little bit.
A little pause. Pause. Definitely. So where can people connect with you and Black and Borderless and become a part of this movement? Like how can folks get locked in?
So they can hit me up personally. So I'm available and accessible on LinkedIn. Catherine is my full name, although, Kate is like the short form of my name, Catherine Endely. You can find me on LinkedIn and link up with me there. I'm pretty open there. Also, the website for Black and Borderless, blackandborderless.org. You can also go there and visit and see the projects that we're working on currently and inquire about more. You can do email by now from me. I would say do catherineenderly@gmail for now. We're also setting up some, email addresses and things like that for Black and Borderless. But for now, catherineenderly@gmail.com works, or on LinkedIn, you can find me, or go to blackandborderless.org to read more about what we're doing and what our mission is.
That's exciting stuff. That's really exciting stuff. So excited to check it out, excited to support it, and excited to be investing into the work across the diaspora with you. Yeah, Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. I really thank you so much for, reaching out to me. This is a great opportunity. I love what you're doing here. This is great stuff. I've listened to some other episodes and I'm really inspired and I'm proud of you as a big sister.
Appreciate that. That means a lot. That means a lot.
Yeah.
For sure. And if you too are listening and want to be inspired, or even if you want to be proud of me, that's nice too. I appreciate it. You can go ahead and watch us on baddestchaplain.com, also on YouTube, also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Just go ahead and listen, y'all. Until next time, y'all be safe out there, be blessed, and take care. And take care of yourself. For next time. Peace.
Thank you. Thank you.